Hello, and welcome to My Week in Baseball. I'm your host, Phil Estruth Harrison. You're listening to episode number 10. This episode is published as a podcast on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, and is available also in a video version on YouTube. So you have many ways to enjoy the show. As always, thanks to Ari Estruth of Brunjo Productions for the intro music created especially for this show. Learn more at brunjo.com. That's brunjo.com. Today, we'll take a look at a Toronto team with a trio of good catchers, a controversial intentional walk, another manager fired, the Angels' Joe Maddon, whether or not position players should pitch in blowouts, and of course, we'll also have a timely Blimerick, our blast from the past, and the cap of the day. So let's get right to it. Okay, today's cap of the day, if you're watching on YouTube, it's easy to see. I'll describe it for you. It is the traditional Pittsburgh Pirates cap. It's got the black background, the black brim, this would be their home cap, and the gold P with the kind of special script that they use, the kind of block letter script with the corners of the P rounded just a bit. Classic Pirates cap. And this was one that I got while coaching my daughter in Little League some years ago. I was one of the assistant coaches, the dads who help out, and our team was the Pirates. So that's where this cap comes from. Next up, catcher. Who needs a catcher? Well, the Bluejays certainly do not, and maybe they'll have one available to trade to your team. As most people know, catcher is traditionally a position that it's hard to get a good offensive player at. That's especially true in this year. But the Blue Jays just called up their top prospect, catcher Gabriel Moreno. He's 22 years old from Venezuela, and he got his first hit in his very first game against Detroit's closer, Gregory Soto, on a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. So congratulations to Gabriel Moreno for his very first hit. I think it's a start of a promising career. A little background, Moreno actually started with the Lansing Lugnuts. So any fans listening from Michigan, that is the A-League affiliate of the Blue Jays, and that was in 2019. And his breakout year really was the following season, well, actually 2021, after the pandemic. But in Double-A ball, he batted .373. That was last year. And this season at Triple-A, he was bashing .324 with a .784 OPS. And he's pretty good defensively. He was also throwing out, got a great arm, throwing out more than half the base runners attempting to steal, which is really excellent, something like 54%. Now, the reason that the Blue Jays might have a catcher to trade is they also have two excellent catchers on the roster. Alejandro Kirk, who's having his best season ever. He's hitting .327 with an .890 OPS. And they also have Danny Jansen, who is quite a good catcher in his own right, although he is currently on the injured list, but he was on a pace for more than 20 home runs in a very limited role. So if your team needs a catcher, ask your general manager to contact the front office of the Toronto Blue Jays. They just might have a deal for you. Next up, the controversial intentional walk of Trea Turner. Now, you may have heard about this, but on June 9, Tony La Russa was questioned after the game as to why he walked Trea Turner on a 1-ball, 2-strike count. And I know when I first read that headline, I thought, that seems odd. You don't normally walk somebody who's already in the middle of an at-bat, especially with 2 strikes. So on the surface of it, I thought, yeah, that does sound a little odd. But when you dig into the article, it makes more sense than you would have thought. And it also made me wonder, why do we not trust managers? We fire them, which we'll get to a second firing of manager soon, and we just don't trust them on a call that really is their call to make. Now, I think that's certainly what makes part of the game fun, is our second guessing and our managing from our couch, right? Anyway, a little more background on this one. So Trea Turner is one of the National League's best hitters. He is right-handed, And this season, when facing a left-handed pitcher on a 1-ball, 2-strike count, he's hitting .333. He was up at the plate initially with a runner on first base. And because there was a runner on first base, that is why they did not choose to intentionally walk him right out the gate. And so that's the thing that caught my attention. I thought usually you'd expect you would walk somebody to start the at-bat, not in the middle of that bat. But there's a wild pitch by the White Sox pitcher, Russa, and that leaves first base open. That moves Freddie Freeman over to second and leaves first base open on that 1-ball, 2-strike count. And the real reason for walking him then, of course, you got 2 strikes, you only need 1 more, but you've got a really good right-handed hitter up. So the next batter up, Max Muncy, is a lefty. Generally, you like the lefty facing the lefty. And especially this season, Max Muncy is batting just .146 against left-handers with no power. Now, I must admit, when I looked up some more details, though, for his career, he is a reverse splits player, which means he's a left-handed hitter that historically in his career has actually hit lefties better than righties and with more power. So in a normal season, you might not choose to walk him to face Muncy, but he's having such a poor season this year, and Trea Turner's having such a good season. That's what ended up happening. So then you're going to wonder, how did it turn out? Well, they wouldn't have been questioning La Russa about it. They would have been praising him, right, if it had worked out. What does Muncy do? He bashes a 3-run homer. So it did not turn out for La Russa or the White Sox. But looking at the details of it, I don't think there's anything wrong with that play. And La Russa had a great quote about it. He was kind of testy. He comes into it acknowledging that there was an unusual count. So he says, I'm paraphrasing this now, but he's saying, what, do you question me because there was a 2-strike count, a 1-ball, 2-strike count? Well, so what he said is that Trea Turner, even with 2 strikes against a lefty, is a batter you would like to avoid if you can. They had an open base and Muncy was batting behind him. They had a better matchup. That was La Russa's feeling. And I agree with him. This season they did. Historically, it's a little more questionable, but definitely this season with Muncy off to such a poor start. But this was a great kind of ending to his quote. This is Tony La Russa, quote, "There again, if somebody disagrees, that's the beauty of this game. Welcome to it." But that wasn't a tough call, meaning not a tough call for him. Anyway, love those kind of controversies. And it's fun to dig into them to try to see what's behind the story a little bit. Next up, I have something to honk about. Wait, were those geese? So this is what's bugging me. And it's Joe Maddon being fired, the second manager fired this year, 2022. At the time, the team was in the midst of a 12-game losing streak, and they actually continue the losing streak for another game after he is removed from being manager. But the thing is, let's take a little deeper look at it. At the time he was fired, the Angels were 27 wins, 29 losses. Not great, not horrible, but they were in second place in their division, and they were only 1.5 games out of the final wild card spot. Now, surely they're not really playing up to their potential, and maybe that's what the GM is thinking, or the owner when they make this decision. But if you look up the Pythagorean win-loss calculation, which is, as we mentioned in previous broadcasts, the win-loss record that a team could be expected to have based on the runs they've scored and the runs they've allowed. Well, it's pretty much the same. It was a couple of wins more. So instead of 27-29, they would have been more like 29-27. So it's very close to what you would expect based on how the players had actually done. And there were key injuries this season. Now, of course, all teams have injuries, but there were injuries to Trout, an injury to their stellar young outfielder, Taylor Ward, injury to their third baseman, Anthony Rendon. The list goes on. And even Ohtani, though still very good, is off a bit from last year's historic season, which is to be expected. Maddon was disappointed and surprised, and he really questioned why it was such a surprise. Why wasn't the upper management talking to anybody, asking the coaches or the players? Because he said, quote, they're the ones who really know. And that makes a lot of sense to me. If you were thinking, we're not doing as well as we'd like, is it the manager's fault? What's going on in the clubhouse? Wouldn't you be talking to the coaches? And wouldn't you be maybe talking to the players? And if you were really smart upper management, you would be doing this all the time, all year long. So it wasn't some special, unusual thing that every few weeks, maybe you check in with the coaches and maybe you check in with one or two players and just say, hey, we're going to do this throughout the year. Just check out, how are things in the clubhouse? How are things going for you? And then you would always have a true kind of pulse of what was going on in the team and how things were going with the manager. And that makes a lot more sense to me than just kind of arbitrarily saying, well, we're in a 12-game losing streak. We've got to do something about this. What are we going to do? Well, we'll fire the manager. Why? Because the general manager rarely fires themselves. What else can we say about that? I like Maddon. I think he's actually one of the best managers in baseball right now. And I would be quite certain some other smart team, maybe even the Phillies here, some other smart team is going to pick him up. But Maddon did win the World Series with the Cubs in 2016. I did read the book about that season. There's a book called The Cubs Way, and it really details his approach and also that of the front office to how they put that winning team together. But I remember in that book that I was impressed by the detail that Maddon gets into and how he has a contingency for any possible move the opposing manager might make in the game, any circumstance that might come up in the following day's game. And he even keeps little note cards to himself. So he just has kind of in little, like little shorthand to himself, what he would do in each of these cases. So it's all right there at his fingertips. I know I was impressed by him. I think he's a good manager, and I think they really made a poor call there. The team would turn around anyway. They get some of the players healthy again, and they're right on the bubble of making the playoffs, no matter what. Enough about Joe Maddon. You can express in the comments, how you feel about that. Next up, position players pitching. I don't know. This one is something that gets in my craw a little bit, and another something to honk about, I suppose. Sometimes I think when a team does that, they're giving up, right? They bring in a position player in a blowout, granted, but they are giving up. You might as well ask them if they want to forfeit and just call the game over. Why are we wasting everybody's time if you've just decided to give up? Or maybe the major leagues should have a mercy rule like they have in Little League. Anyway, something to think about. But this comes up because recently, future Hall of Fame catcher Yadier Molina, a 19-year veteran, was brought in for not the first, but the second time this year to pitch. He's a catcher. He's a catcher. He's a catcher. They bring him in to pitch. St. Louis was down 11-3. Now, the interesting thing that happens in this inning for him is that he actually gets his first career strikeout. He strikes out Isaac Paredes, a rookie for the Rays, on 3 straight pitches. What are those pitches? 2 50-mile-an-hour curveballs and a 76-mile-an-hour fastball. Embarrassing? Yes. Funny? Perhaps. So Paredes does have the option now of telling people that he struck out against a future Hall of Famer, and then he can laugh and say, well, a Hall of Fame catcher, that is. Anyway, Molina pitched fine that night. He gave up 2 hits, no runs, and he lowered his ERA to 18.00. Yeah, at the start of the game, his ERA was 36, because in the previous outing when they brought him in, he had given up 4 hits, 2 homers, and 4 earned runs. So if you're thinking about wanting to speed up the game, does it make sense to bring in a position player who's likely to give up a lot of walks and a lot of hits and a lot of hard hit balls. I think Major League Baseball might want to think about this. There is actually a rule about it, and I had to look this up. The rule is that position players are unable to pitch unless it is extra innings or their team is ahead or trailing by more than 6 runs when they take the mound. So basically blowouts or situations where you're in a long game and you've worn out the bullpen. But that really shouldn't happen very often, not wearing out the bullpen, because teams these days are carrying 7 and sometimes 8 relievers at a time. So really, none of them can come in and pitch. The previous pitcher can't pitch one more inning. Really? I don't know. You can tell I'm not too keen on it. I think Molina probably had some fun with it. Paredes might have had some fun with it, but it's really a goofy thing, an unnecessary thing, and I don't really think good for the game. So, as we have in every episode, today we have a Blimerick, our baseball limerick, and it is a tribute to Yadier Molina as a pitcher. Here it is. With only 7 good arms in the pen, in a blowout, there's no use to spend. A true pitcher, it seems, would be a waste of some steam. So Yadi's curveball and inning must end. On to today's blast from the past. So because today's cap of the day is the Pittsburgh Pirates, our blast from the past will be a pirate from the 70s and early 80s, and that is another Moreno. This is center fielder Omar Moreno. Omar Moreno played center field for the Pittsburgh Pirates when they won the World Series in 1979, and he was finished top 20 in the NL MVP voting that year, and was also voted by Sporting News to their all-star team. He led the National League in stolen bases 2 times during his career and caught stealing 3 times. His career success rate was 73%. Now, I remember reading some analysis by Bill James and perhaps some other sabermetrics gurus that typically 75% was the cutoff. If you really needed to be successful 75% of the time or more to really help your team, or else you were making too many outs on the base paths and it was actually hurting your team. But he's right on the cusp there, and he was a very good base stealer. He has a low career batting average, on base percentage, and on base plus slugging, which I'll describe in a little bit in a moment. Defensively, he's reasonably good. In 1977, he was 10th in the National League in defensive WAR. So defensive wins above replacement, meaning he was reasonably good outfielder. 5 seasons, he finished in the top 10 in fielding percentage, 2 times first. On 6 seasons, he finished in the top 10 in range factor per 9 innings. And range factor is a measure of the putouts, the catches you make, plus the assists that you get, throwing a runner out for an assist. So it's range factor is a way of measuring how many balls you're getting to, how many people you're throwing out, and kind of combining that, and then per 9 innings. So he was 6 seasons in the top 10 in that defensive statistic. 1 time he finished first. What else? His career range factor per 9 innings is 16th, which 16th all time for center field, which really isn't too bad. So if you remember some of these other players from around that era, he's just below Willie Wilson, and who was more or less a contemporary. Willie Wilson may have started a few years later. And then he's just above Kirby Puckett, the longtime Twins center fielder. So a decent center fielder. But Hall of Fame credentials, not so much. By one measure for the Hall of Fame worthiness, which is called JAWS, and JAWS is a special version of wins above replacement, Moreno is the 260th best center fielder of all time. Well, that statistic takes into account both offense and defense. I'm thinking the defense is where he came out better. And in case you're wondering who is the number 1 Hall of Fame worthy center fielder of all time, Willie Mays. One other thing to note, the lowest ranked center fielder who actually made the Hall of Fame. So remember, Omar Moreno here is 260. The lowest ranked center fielder who made the Hall of Fame was at 181. Someone I'm sure you have never heard of, Ned Hanlon, who played in the 1800s. So anyhow, Moreno is not close to Hall of Fame credentials, but I will talk through a few of his stats because he did have some interesting years. So he did twice lead the National League in plate appearances. He was a leadoff hitter during many of his seasons in Pittsburgh. And also those same 2 years, he led the league in at-bats because he walked a little. He walked kind of in the 45 to 50-ish range most years. He did lead the league in triples once. And the 2 years he led the league in stolen bases, in 1978, he had 71 stolen bases. In 1979, he had 77. Both of those were league leading numbers. Interestingly, the most bases he stole in a single season was 1 year later in 1980 when he stole 96, but he did not have the most in the league. Actually, we may have an episode about that later. That was 97 stolen bases in the National League by the Montreal Expos center fielder Ron LaFleur, who had previously played for the Tigers. And neither of those two guys with 96 and 97 steals, neither of them led the majors because that was the year Rickey Henderson had 130. So I may actually do something more on that in a future episode, but a little bit of interest there about Omar Moreno. So career 252 batting average, 306 on base percentage. That's pretty poor, especially for a leadoff hitter. What it really tells me is he's making a lot of outs in the leadoff spot. Now, in 1979, he did score 110 runs. And that was actually his best year, batting average wise. He hit 282 that year. But in his career OPS, on base plus slugging, so he didn't have much power. And the highest year was 8 home runs. He was better at doubles and triples, but really surprisingly few doubles, given how fast he likely would have been to steal those bases. Anyway, his OPS plus, which is what measures your offensive contribution compared to league average during that time, his career OPS plus is 79, which means he's 21% below the average offensive player during those years. So not particularly good offensively. Something though that occurred to me when I was looking at this is, we don't very often have players who steal this many bases. And maybe that should be figured in to slugging. It's really an extra base, right? It's similar to a double. Now, granted, a double, if there are runners on, can drive people home, where a steal of second or a steal of third isn't driving anybody home. But it is giving you that extra base. It seems to me there should be some consideration for that. Now, most guys, if you're stealing 3 or 4 or 8 or 10 bases during the year, even, it's not going to have much effect on your slugging percentage. But it seems to me that that's something we could consider due to, it would have made a difference. It would have made a difference. I'd have to run the math to see how much difference, but in the years when he was stealing 70 plus bases, and in fact, his 162 game average for stolen bases, 57 over a 12-year career. So over 12 years, if he played a 162 game season, which several times he did actually play a full 162 games, he would average stealing 57 bases a year. So anyway, that is our blast from the past, Omar Moreno of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And that's all for today, my friends. Join us next time because honestly, what can be better than talking baseball? Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Phil Estruth Harrison. We'll see you next time on My Week in Baseball.